Okay, Chloe, this one is for you. Another Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle story because I know how much you love them. So this one is called The Show-Off Cure. Chapter 1, The Show-Off Cure. It was a beautiful morning. A bluebird sat on a small branch in the flowering cherry tree and swayed gently back and forth. A crocus pushed his golden head through the tender green grass and blinked in the sudden sunlight. Mrs. Carmody hummed as she laid slices of bacon in the black iron skillet. "Spring is my favorite time of year," she said to Mandy the dog, who was lying in the kitchen doorway, scratching a flea and waiting to trip somebody. Mrs. Carmody plugged in the toaster, got out the raspberry jam, then went to the front hall and called upstairs to her husband, "Jordan, breakfast!" and to her little boy, "Philip, are you up?" Philip, who was 10 years old and still under the covers, called out sleepily, "Practically all dressed, Mom. Be right down." Constance, his sister, who was 11 3/4, yelled from the bathroom where she was testing how lipstick would look when she was 13. "Philip isn't even up, Mom. He won't be down for about 10 hours. Philip shouted, "Old spy, tattletale." Constance said, "Be quiet, little boy. You bore me." Mrs. Carmody called again louder, "Philip, get out of bed this instant. Connie, wipe off that lipstick. Hurry, Jordan dear, while the toast is hot." She went back to the kitchen and gave the percolator a little shake to hurry it up. Then she walked over and stood by the open back door, breathing deeply of the fragrant early morning air. Her pleasant reverie was suddenly broken by Mr. Carmody, who came grumpily into the kitchen, tripped over Mandy, and stepped heavily into her water bowl, which was on the floor beside the stove. Mrs. Carmody grabbed the sink sponge and began wiping up the water. Mr. Carmody growled, "Well, that's certainly a nice morning greeting." Mrs. Carmody said, "Oh, Jordan dear, I'm so sorry. Did you get wet?" "It doesn't matter," said Mr. Carmody mournfully. "Nothing matters any more." "What do you mean, nothing matters any more?" asked Mrs. Carmody as she squeezed out the sponge. "Just that," said Mr. Carmody sadly, pouring almost the whole pitcher of cream on his shredded wheat biscuit. "Are you sick?" asked Mrs. Carmody, peering anxiously at him. "No, I am not sick," he said, "or at least I'm not physically sick. Just sick at heart." Mrs. Carmody buttered the toast, put the plates in to warm, stirred the eggs, lifted the bacon onto a paper towel to drain, checked the color of the coffee, refilled Mandy's water bowl, then said, "What in the world are you talking about, Jordan? You don't make sense." "He makes sense to me," said Connie, flouncing into the kitchen, "because I feel the same way. I'm so ashamed I could die." "What in the world are you talking about?" said Mrs. Carmody. "Are you ready for your eggs, Jordan?" "I suppose so," said Mr. Carmody dolefully. Quickly, Mrs. Carmody took the plates out of the oven, divided the eggs into 4 equal portions, added a dash of paprika, laid on 4 strips of bacon and 2 pieces of toast, carried 2 of the plates to the table, and snapped them down in front of her husband and daughter. "Now," she said, folding her arms, "tell me what this is all about." Connie picked up a piece of bacon and began nibbling at it. "Well," she said, "if you really want to know." "I do," said her mother. "Well," Connie said, "the point is that Philip is ruining all our lives, and you won't face it." "Ruining our lives? Philip?" said Mrs. Carmody. "Don't be ridiculous." I'm not being ridiculous," said Connie. "Philip is such a disgusting little show-off. I'm ashamed to bring my friends home any more. What about last night? He disgraced poor Daddy." Mrs. Carmody gazed at her daughter intently for a minute and then said, "Connie, you've got on lipstick again. Go upstairs and wash it off." "Oh, honestly," Connie sighed heavily. "Every single girl in the whole United States of America wears lipstick but me. I'm just a freak, a poor freak with a disgusting little brother." Yes, I know," said her mother. "Go up and wash the lipstick off. There's my tummy's growling for you." When she was sure she could hear Connie's furious footsteps on the stairs, she turned to her husband and said, "Now, Jordan, dear, what is all this?" Mr. Carmody said, "Meg, Philip is an obnoxious little show-off. Last night was the worst I've ever seen him, and Bob Waltham is my most important client, and frankly, I wouldn't blame him if he never came into this house again." "Oh, Jordan," said Mrs. Carmody, laughing, "Philip was just trying to be entertaining." "Do you call putting a whole baked potato in his mouth entertaining? Do you call drinking an entire glass of water without stopping, then choking and turning purple and spitting water all over the table entertaining? Do you call looking cross-eyed, touching his chin with his tongue, wiggling his ears, standing on his head, reciting the alphabet backwards and forwards and sideways and upside down entertaining? Well, I don't, and neither did Bob Waltham." "Now, Jordan," said Mrs. Carmody, "you know that Bob Waltham is a stuffy old bore. You've said so yourself, and after all, Philip is only 10. He's just a little boy. You shouldn't be so hard on him." "Sounds to me like she's just making excuses." "You mean he shouldn't be so hard on me," said Mr. Carmody, angrily ripping a piece of bread in half. "Meg, something has to be done about that boy. Now, today." Just then Philip came rattling down the stairs and skidded into the breakfast room. "Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom," he said cheerfully. "Morning," said Mr. Carmody grumpily. "Good morning, Philip, dear," said Mrs. Carmody. Philip sat down, grabbed the sugar bowl, and began dumping sugar on his shredded wheat biscuit. "Not so much sugar, honey," said his mother. Philip added 2 more heaping teaspoons of sugar, then dumped the rest of the pitcher of cream on his cereal. Looking brightly, eagerly at his father, he said, "Hey, Dad, want to watch me put this whole shredded wheat biscuit in my mouth all at once?" "I do not," said his father. "Not even if I whistled Dixie with it in my mouth?" "No," roared his father. "Eat your breakfast, dear," said his mother, putting a fresh pitcher of cream on the table. "What if Philip began. "Stop talking," bellowed his father. Connie, who had come downstairs and was standing unnoticed in the doorway, said, "What a repulsive little show-off. My gosh, Mother, can't you see how disgusting he is?" "My gosh, Mother. My gosh, Mother, can't you see how disgusting he is?" mimicked Philip in a high, squeaky voice. Oh, let me try that again. "My gosh, Mother, can't you see how disgusting he is?" mimicked Philip in a high, squeaky voice. "Shoot him, Mother. Kill him. Cut him up with the butcher knife. Mommy, he embarrasses me in front of my stupid, ugly, giggling friends." "Now, children," said Mrs. Carmody gently. Mr. Carmody glared around the table and said fiercely, "I want absolute quiet." "My gosh, Dad, what's the matter?" asked Philip. "Are you sick or something?" "Yes, I'm sick or something," said Mr. Carmody, savagely jabbing a spoon into the raspberry jam. "I'll get you an aspirin," said Philip, sliding out of his chair. "I'll get 2 aspirins, and I'll carry them all the way downstairs on my nose. Watch me." "Sit still," shouted Mr. Carmody. "Sit still and eat your breakfast and don't talk." "Well, okay," said Philip, "but you don't have to be so crabby." "Be quiet," yelled his father. Philip gave him a reproachful look, sat down again, and began to eat his shredded wheat biscuit. Mrs. Carmody brought her plate and Philip's from the kitchen and sat down. She looked out the window at the pale pink cherry blossoms and the clear sky and the fat bluebird swaying on the branch, but she no longer felt happy. She took a sip of coffee, which was lukewarm, and looked around the breakfast table. Philip was eating busily, but the minute she looked at him, he grinned broadly and whispered, "Hey, Mom, want to watch me balance my cocoa cup on my forehead?" She smiled, shook her head, and motioned for him to be quiet. "Even if it's clear full of boiling hot cocoa?" She shook her head. "Even if it has the spoon in it?" She shook her head. "What a bunch of crab patches," Philip said. "Quiet!" bellowed his father. Philip reached for the jam dish and began sulkily emptying it onto his plate. When breakfast was at last over and everyone had left for work or school, Mrs. Carmody heated up the coffee, poured herself a cup, and sat down at the table to look at the morning paper. Just as she opened the paper, the corner of her eye caught a glimpse of something white on the floor under Philip's chair. She reached over and picked up a small folded piece of paper. She opened it up, smoothed it out, and read, "Dear Mrs. Carmody, I am having a little difficulty with Philip. Will you please call me at your earliest convenience? Sincerely, Edith Periwinkle." Mrs. Carmody looked at her watch. It was 4 minutes to 9. Perhaps she could get Miss Periwinkle before the bell rang. She hurried into the hall and dialed the number of the school. When Miss Periwinkle heard Mrs. Carmody's anxious, worried voice, she said, "I didn't intend to worry you, Mrs. Carmody. It isn't anything serious. It is just that Philip has become quite a show-off," said Mrs. Carmody. "Well, yes," said Miss Periwinkle. "I guess that is the right word. I also must admit that he is very entertaining, and his little schoolmates think he is very funny and laugh at everything he does. Unfortunately, he no longer confines his antics to recess and the schoolyard, so I have to take steps, which is why I wrote the note." "Well," said Mrs. Carmody, "I should have seen it coming, because we are having our problems with him at home, too. Have you any suggestions?" "Yes, I have," said Miss Periwinkle. "I think you should call—" Who do you think she should call? Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. You've heard of her, haven't you?" "I've heard the name," said Mrs. Carmody. "Is she some sort of doctor?" "Oh, my, no," said Miss Periwinkle. "She is just a very nice little woman who loves and understands children and has a very magic way of curing their bad habits. Her telephone number is Vine Maple 12345. "Just a minute while I get a pencil," said Philip's mother. Of course she couldn't find a pencil, but she did finally find a broken green crayon with which she wrote down Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's telephone number on the back of the gas bill. Mrs. Carmody's hand was shaking as she dialed the number, but Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle had such a warm, friendly voice that Mrs. Carmody got right over her nervousness and told her all about Philip. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle laughed and said, "Isn't it a shame that children can't be all evened up? I mean, some are show-offs, and some are shy, and some are quiet, and some are noisy, and some laugh too much, and some cry too much. Oh, I could go on, but loud or quiet, shy or show-offy, timid or boisterous, children are wonderful, and I love them all." "So do I," said Philip's mother. "And actually, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, Philip showing off doesn't bother me, but his daddy says he is obnoxious, and his sister Connie says he is disgusting, and this morning his teacher, Miss Periwinkle, told me that he is getting out of hand." "Well," said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, "if it were only his older sister who complained about Philip, I would be inclined to let time work things out. But as long as Philip is annoying his daddy and Miss Periwinkle, who is one of the best fifth-grade teachers in this county, then we had better take steps." "Take steps?" quavered Philip's mother. "What do you mean by steps?" "Oh, it's very simple. said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. "Have Philip come down after school, and I'll give him a bottle of show-off powder. For the next few days, sprinkle a little on him before meals, especially when you are having company and just before he leaves for school in the morning. I'm sure you won't have any more trouble." "But what is this show-off powder? Will it hurt Philip?" asked Mrs. Carmody fearfully. "Show-off powder is guaranteed to be harmless," said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, "but it will stop showing off. You see, it makes the show-off invisible." "Invisible?" wailed Philip's mother. "You mean I won't be able to see my own little boy?" "Not when he's showing off," said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle matter-of-factly. "Nobody will be able to see him. But when he stops showing off and is normal, he'll come back into focus." "Are you sure?" asked Philip's mother. "Oh, my, yes," said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. "Now, don't worry about it. Just send Philip up after school. I know that everything is going to be fine. Goodbye, and don't worry." But Mrs. Carmody did worry. She worried as she washed the breakfast dishes and tidied up the house. She worried as she made out the grocery list and sorted the laundry. But she worried the most when she was straightening up Philip's room. What if this powder makes Philip disappear and then something goes wrong and he won't come back? She sobbed as she took 2 apple cores, 3 funny books, a slingshot, and an empty box of Smith Brothers cough drops out from under Philip's pillow. Philip's room was so messy, and she was in there such a long time picking up and imagining terrible things that she finally decided not to send for the magic show-off powder. That old powder was far too dangerous to use on a sensitive, intelligent little boy like Philip. And anyway, Philip showing off was really very clever, and maybe someday he'd be on the stage. Then the front door crashed open. A loud voice yelled, "Mom! Hey, Mom, where are you?" And Philip was home from school. Mrs. Carmody rushed downstairs, and sure enough, there was Philip, very much alive and visible, sitting at the kitchen table, wolfing down gingerbread and milk. His back was toward his mother, but she could see that one sleeve was ripped out of the sweater. "Philip," his mother said, "what in the world happened to your sweater?" "Fell off my bike," Philip said through a mouthful of gingerbread. "Oh, sweetheart," his mother said, running to him. "Did you hurt yourself?" "Oh, not much," Philip said. "Kind of tore my pants, though, and ripped one of my new school shoes. See?" He held out one leg and showed his mother a pant leg ripped jaggedly to the knee. He held out the other and showed her his brown Oxford with a large tear over the instep. He also had a cut over his eye, a skinned place on his nose, and blood on his chin. "Oh, Philip," his mother said, "you might have been killed. Were you hit by a car?" Philip said. "Did some big boy push you?" "Gosh, no," Philip said. "Well, then what did happen?" his mother asked. "Oh, nothing." Philip drained his glass of milk. "Can I have another piece of gingerbread, Mom?" "Certainly," said his mother. "But first I want to know about the accident with your bicycle." "Well," Philip said, if you want to really know, I was sitting in the basket of my bike, riding down Mission Hill backwards, singing Polly Wolly Doodle, and I saw the bread truck coming, and I guess I didn't turn soon enough, and I ran into the Wallace's iron fence, and I caught my shoe on the pedal and my pants on a picket, and I hit my eye on the handlebars, and I don't know what else happened. But boy, you should have heard the kids and that old bread man laugh." "No doubt," said his mother dryly. "Now you go upstairs and change your trousers and your shoes. Bring me the trousers to mend. Take the torn shoe down to Mr. Risotto and ask him if he can put a patch on it. And on your way home, stop at Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's. She has something for me. Do you know where Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle lives?" "Sure I do," Philip said. "We play down there all the time. What's she got for you?" "Never you mind," said his mother. "Just don't forget to stop by there. Now scoot." A little after 5:30, Mrs. Carmody happened to look out the kitchen window and saw Philip coming up the drive, followed by a crowd of children. On his head he was carrying his shoe. Balanced on the toe of the shoe was a small jar. Sitting on the jar was a little green frog. When Philip saw his mother's face at the window, he called out, "Hey, Mom, look it! Watch me, I'm going to jump over the wheelbarrow with all this stuff on my head." "Philip, don't!" his mother called. But he couldn't hear her, and she watched horrified as he made a run for the wheelbarrow, caught his foot in the garden hose, and fell backwards into the rhododendron bush. The small jar from Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle flew up in the air and landed on the concrete with a crash. Mrs. Carmody dashed out, knelt down, and began picking little pieces of broken glass out of the spilled white powder. Having extricated himself from the rhododendron bush, Philip said, "Gee, Mom, I'm sorry I busted it. I didn't mean to." "Don't talk," his mother said briskly. "Go in and get me a clean white envelope out of my desk and the spatula off the stove. Hurry!" While Philip was gone, Mrs. Carmody carefully pushed the white powder into a little mound and held her hand over it to keep the wind from blowing it away. When Philip brought her the envelope and the spatula, she scooped up all the powder into the envelope, all but about a half a teaspoonful. This she carefully lifted into the palm of her hand and blew it at Philip. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" he said, rubbing his eyes and coughing. "Something very wise, I'm sure," said his mother. Just then Mr. Carmody's car turned into the driveway. Immediately Philip jumped up into the wheelbarrow and yelled, "Watch me, Dad! I'm going to stand on my head in the wheelbarrow. I'm going to stand on my head and say the alphabet backwards." Mrs. Carmody looked at the wheelbarrow, but it was suddenly empty. There was no one there. Not only that, but there was no sound either. Mr. Carmody got out of the car and said, "Where's Philip? Wasn't he here just a moment ago?" "Yes, he was," said Mrs. Carmody, smiling a secret smile. "Well, I want him to put the hose and that wheelbarrow in the garage," said Mr. Carmody. "I'll tell him," said Mrs. Carmody. "He should be back in a minute or so." She and Mr. Carmody went into the house and closed the kitchen door. Philip, quite red in the face from standing on his head in the wheelbarrow and hoarse from reciting the alphabet backwards and forwards, called after them, "Hey, Mom and Dad, look at me!" But they didn't even glance at him. They acted as if they didn't even hear him. "Hey, you kids, look at me!" he called to the children who had followed him home from Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's. But nobody answered. They just turned and walked out of the yard. Slowly he righted himself, climbed out of the wheelbarrow, and went into the kitchen. "How come you and Dad didn't watch my trick?" he asked his mother, who was busy at the stove. She said, "We didn't see you doing any tricks. Now go and put away the hose and the wheelbarrow and sweep up that broken glass. Dinner will be ready in about 5 minutes, and it's your favorite." "You mean frankfurters and baked beans and brown bread?" Philip asked. "That's right," said his mother. "Hot diggity," said Philip. Reaching into the broom closet, his mother took out the broom and dustpan and handed them to him. "Here," she said, very relieved that he was visible again. "Sweep up that glass first." Philip took the broom, held it up over his shoulders, and began making loud zooming noises. "Hey, Mom," he yelled, "watch me. I'm a jet plane. Here I go for a takeoff." As he said, "Watch me," he began to disappear. With takeoff, he was gone. Humming contentedly, his mother took the lid off the steamer and poked the brown bread. At dinner, he disappeared 3 times. The first time was when he turned his chair around, crouched down on the seat, and said, "Look at me. I'm a big gorilla in a cage. Toss me a banana, somebody." He disappeared just after "toss me." Mr. Carmody almost jumped out of his chair. "Meg, Meg," he yelled at Mrs. Carmody, "the boy's gone. There must be a trap door under that chair." "Don't get hysterical, Jordan," said Mrs. Carmody. "He'll be back." And he was in about 2 minutes. The next morning, after he was dressed, Philip climbed on the banister and yelled at Connie, "Hey, Connie, look it! I'm sliding down the banister frontward, sitting up." Then he disappeared and didn't come back into focus until everybody else had finished breakfast and his poached eggs were quite cold. His mother noticed he had a large purple bump over his left eye. As he slid into his chair, Philip said, "Nobody in this whole darn family cares what happens to me. My whole skull is probably cracked, but a lot you care." "Quiet!" roared Mr. Carmody. Mrs. Carmody said, "Eat your eggs, dear. It's getting late." As she spoke to him, she leaned over and sprinkled some of the show-off powder in his hair. Turning around and giving her a suspicious look, Philip said, "What you doing to my hair, Mom?" "Just smoothing it down," said his mother, smiling dreamily. During geography, while Miss Periwinkle was standing with her back to the class drawing a map on the blackboard, Philip stood up on his seat, wiggled his ears, looked cross-eyed, looked like an ape, and scratched himself, all surefire tricks for making his classmates giggle. Nobody laughed at all. In fact, nobody even looked at him because he wasn't there. During recess, he put a whole package of bubble gum in his mouth and blew a bubble bigger than his head, but even though the children were all right around him, nobody pointed or laughed or said one thing. Because, of course, they couldn't see him. Then the bubble burst and got Philip's hair and face all gummy. Then the children laughed because he was back in focus again. But Philip didn't think it was funny. He didn't think it was funny at all, especially when the school nurse rubbed his face and neck and head with benzine, which burned. After school, he didn't feel very funny. His head hurt, and so did his elbow, so he rode his bike home, sitting on the seat the ordinary way. Bobby Westover and Billy Markle rode beside him, and they talked quite solemnly about baseball, except once when Billy rode fast down Mission Hill with no hands, yelling, "Help, help, I'm out of control. My engine's conked out, my landing gear's stuck. Call the crash crew." Bobby and Philip laughed like anything until Mrs. Allen backed out of her garage and almost hit Billy, who couldn't stop and ran into a tree. Mrs. Allen turned pure white and shook and was very mad. She said, "Billy Markle, I'm going to call your mother up and tell her what a little show-off you are. You almost got killed and you almost wrecked my car, and you have practically given me a nervous breakdown." Billy, who was crying, said, "Well, look at me. My shirt's tore and my nose is bleeding and my bike's wrecked." Mrs. Allen said, "Go on into the kitchen. I'll fix you up, but don't bleed all over my clean linoleum." Bobby and Philip called goodbye to Billy, but he didn't hear them. As they rode down the hill around the corner toward Philip's house, Philip said, "Poor dumb Billy. What a show-off." Well, what you think about that story, Chloe? Hope you like it. Love you.